Hello and welcome to this special Thursday interview here on Viking.TV with me, Anne Diamond. And this week we're talking about the amazing men and women who have explored the globe, the highest and lowest points, the farthest flung places and the most hidden worlds through the spirit of expedition. Along the way, I simply have to applaud the man who has at last gone where no older man has gone before. Indeed, he has oldly gone, and that is the amazing actor come icon William Shatner, also known as Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise, who just a few days ago actually did make it into space aboard the extraordinary rocket New Shepard of Jeff Bezos' space expedition company Blue Horizon. Now at 90, Shatner is the oldest human to ever make it into space, and after his career inspiring so many astronauts all over the world, particularly NASA, where Star Trek is seriously revered, he surely deserved that dream come true. He spent 3 minutes in zero gravity, about 10 minutes all in suborbital flight, after reaching an altitude of 351,186 feet and a velocity of, 351,186 feet and a velocity of 2,235 miles an hour. He said he was struck by the vulnerability of Earth and the relative sliver of its atmosphere. He said everybody in the world needs to do this, to see the blue colour whip by, and now you're staring into blackness. That's the thing. The covering of blue, this sheath, this blanket, this comforter of blue that we have around all the time, and we just say, oh, that's the blue sky. And then suddenly you shoot through it all and you're looking into blackness. He then broke into tears and he told Bezos, I'm so filled with emotion with what just happened. I hope I never recover from this. It was a wonderful moment for him and actually for all of us through him. At a cost, though, of several $1 million per seat, it's rumoured, perhaps most of us will have to wait a while for our turn. But my next guest would probably remind us that there is a lot the Earth has to offer curious but careful explorers. So now I'd love you to meet an extraordinary man who has spent most of his life exploring both poles of this planet and plenty of places in between, and someone who will become one of Viking's premier guest lecturers on board the new expedition ships. That's Viking Atlantis and Viking Polaris. Just look at how beautiful they are going to be, rolling out very soon. I wonder for how many people watching right now, those ships will be an absolute dream come true. Well, back to my guest today. I am reliably informed his lifelong passion for the polar regions started with a children's book. So welcome to Nick Cox, and let's ask him, does he still have that book? Hello there, Nick.
Hello, Anne. Thank you so much for having me along today. This is a joy. Yes, I do have that book, and have treasured and looked after it all these years. And I was age of 6 when my dear parents gave me this book, the Puffin picture book. And can you see that there?
Yes, Discovery of the Poles.
Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely little book. And of course, it was produced before the Trans-Antarctic expedition of 1956. So it's, it's an old account of the poles.
So what sort of family did you come from? A conventional family, or were they explorers in some way?
Mother very musical, father a a GP, country GP here in the Lake District, and lived in a household full of badgers and weasel. Had 9 badgers, 18 weasels, a merlin. It was the most extraordinary household. It was just lovely. You know, everywhere you went, there'd be a crow hopping around with sellotape around its wing or something. But they, you know, cared for waifs and strays, and so it was a lovely. They're full of imagination. Father, yes, he was adventurous, and I think if he had known of what was going on in the Antarctic, he probably would have done it as well. So full of enthusiasm, they're both. It was always, yes, go for it, you know, just go. And even in those early years when I wasn't quite sure, it wasn't that easy to get to the polar regions in 1975 when I set out. I'm 6 years old when I had the ambition, so they were marvellous.
It is extraordinary, actually, to have an ambition quite that young and fulfill it as you did. But I mean, I can see where a love of animals and nature must have come from your family. But when you opened that book, can you remember there being some sort of a switch in you that switched on, that you wanted to do that?
Yes, I think, yeah, I think somewhere deep rooted, the fascination was, you know, this looks like another planet, and that grabs us all, doesn't it, to this day, you know, and it is like another planet. It's just so unlike, but there was so little known about them then in the mid-70s and earlier, or when I was 6 in the 50s and 60s. And so there was that fascination, but there was also a fascination, and it still exists, about isolation and being very isolated, and how to cope with that, and the sort of group dynamics of living together, and that always fascinated, and it still does. I think there's a lot of things in polar regions that haven't changed. You know, we know about the heroic era and all the, you know, these incredible people, Amundsen, Scott, Shackleton, Nansen, all these marvelous, amazing people. And then the stories that go on through between the war years and then post-war years. But, you know, the big outdoors hasn't changed much. It's just as wild and wonderful as it ever was.
And still as much of a challenge. But clearly that book and obviously what interested you as you grew older kept your ambition burning until at the age of 21 you did join the British Antarctic Survey. So what was your background? Had you got a degree in something by then? I mean, how were you qualified to join the team in the first place?
No, I think, you know, my parents probably had, you know, high hopes that I'd go and do something sensible, but no sooner had I gone to the secondary school than I met a marvellous man called John Bull, who'd been in the Antarctic in 1955. And we became firm friends, a wonderful teacher, and went climbing with him and all those sort of things. And he told me the Antarctic Survey. So I wrote to them when I was 16 and got a very polite letter back saying, there are 2 problems here. One, you're too young, minimum age is 21, and the other is you've got nothing to offer, which was fair enough. Which was fair enough.
Harsh.
At the time, they only had surveyors and geologists, but they said, please don't go and train as a geologist or a surveyor on our account, because we've got so little money. We can't tell from year to year whether it's going to happen. But we always have bases, and they always need maintaining. So if you really want to go, then go and get a trade. So I spoke to my parents and just said, look, that's it. Can I go and do a trade? I don't know which one, but can I go and do some trade so that I can go? So I left school, did a 4-year apprenticeship as a carpenter in a Lake District village, and greatly enjoyed it. And it was wonderful men that I worked with, and learned a lot. And then went for interview again in London in 1975, and they signed me up as boatman, which but actually I was chippy as well, so it was boatman chippy, and then of course things were a bit different then. They didn't have doctors on all the bases, so they asked, I think because my father was a GP, they said, would I mind being the look after the medical affairs? I think quack's probably the right term. But
well, just because your father is a GP, they thought you might be quite good at being the medic.
I think so. And the training then was actually to do a first aid course. So my father took me under his wing, and an adopted uncle took me into operating theatre, and Bill Bousfield, the dentist, showed me how to pull teeth. And Bob Macmillan showed me anaesthetics. And with the ship's captain's medical guide under my arm, I set off south, and it was extraordinary, really. We did have the choice whether to have our appendix out before we left, and some did, some didn't. And we all had our wisdom teeth pulled out.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But that just shows that those are the very things that can crop up and cause a real emergency.
Yeah.
And if you're in the middle of nowhere in the Antarctic or Arctic, they can be really hazardous, can't they? Wisdom teeth and an appendix. That's extraordinary. Did you ever, we're getting ahead of ourselves now, so you actually did go out and join a team of the British Antarctic Survey. Where did you go?
I went to, the first 2 years, I went to Sydney Station, which, funny enough, is probably the most isolated of the stations. An aeroplane's never been there. Helicopters have landed from ship, but only local too. And it gets a very heavy pack in the Weddell Sea system. Of the two bases in the Antarctic, Stonington and Sydney, they're the two that ships haven't managed to get to. So people have had to spend 3 years rather than 2 because the ship couldn't get there. So it's, of all the places to have me looking after medical things, it really was the most difficult to get to, actually.
And what an onerous responsibility, being the only guy who can pull teeth if they hurt.
And then later, of course, I went down to Rother, a research station, and did a winter there, and then as a field guide from there as well, summer seasons from there.
Now clearly, being brought up in the Lake District, you've seen some harsh winters by then, but nothing like what you met there. What can you describe what it was like when you first reached there? What was the cold like? What was the place like? What were the people like?
Yeah, it's extraordinary, and all these lovely people on board Viking cruises will experience this, that going through the Antarctic convergence, which is where the hot and the cold mix, and over this incredibly short distance, you go from wandering around in shirt sleeves to needing a good thick pullover and more. And it's and icebergs start appearing, and it's just another world. You've gone through that doorway into the Antarctic, and that was the same for me then. Just to go through, hadn't experienced anything like it, and to arrive in this cold. I mean, I think the equipment was fairly basic then. We had ex-Korean War clothing, battle dress trousers and a tartan shirt and a rather nasty string vest and that sort of thing. And the heating wasn't so good. I remember the bedrooms didn't have heating, and army blankets instead of, you know, today's duvets and that sort of thing. So it was a bit different, but you adapt to the cold and quickly. And the real cold, and both Antarctic and Arctic, I've been sort of knocking on minus 50 or below, 50 degrees centigrade below, and that isn't nice. That certainly isn't nice. But it's, you know, in the sort of 20s and 30s, and we know it from ski holidays, don't we? Very often it's actually quite a dry cold.
Yes, very different sort of cold.
Yeah, and that more bearable. But no, it was, when I first went south, it was into this tiny little community of men only, of course. Then we were in different times, and tiny little community, and just that huge feeling of isolation. And, you know, don't get this wrong, you're a long way from help.
Yes. Yeah. What about the food? What was the food like?
Yeah, that again was pretty basic. It was all sort of dried vegetables, dried meat, dried everything, and some tinned, of course. and a little bit of Frozen, which we had some bits and bobs, but we supplemented with, which you could then, we wouldn't of course consider the idea now, but we did eat penguin eggs, and if we took seal for samples, and then later on we took seal to feed the dogs, the sledge dogs.
Yes.
Down at Rotherham. So we ate seal steaks, and they were, I must say, terrible thing to say, but they were very good.
Is it anything, what you're describing to me now, was it anything like the pages in that children's book?
Yes, it was actually. Yeah, it was. Those last few pages sort of describing a 1940s, 50s base. I think one of the lovely, I'm not sure if lovely is the right word, but to be on an Antarctic base between the end of the Second World War and the Falklands War, nothing much happened. There was the heroic era, and then sadly 2 world wars, and nothing happened much between really 1914 and 1945. Yeah. So it was a sort of new start, and the Antarctic Survey were on a very low budget, and the bases didn't actually change very much between the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the Falkland War. So to be there at that time, it was all a little bit shoestring. I mean, it was marvelous what they did, and a fantastic outfit, but it was, really based on manpower and dog power, and later on skidoo power, and all these sorts of things, and as I say, clothing, food, communication was all based.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. I mean, how often could you communicate, and how did you do it with home?
Well, to begin with, we had 100 words home every month by telex, which of course is like a sort of Morse code on a ticker tape. Yeah. And we would write out in block capitals your loving message to your loved ones at home, and go through to the radio operator who'd type it up, and that went through to the Falkland Islands, and they'd retype it, and then if the ionosphere was right and the radio signals were right, they'd get it through to the UK, and then they'd type it up again and send it to Cambridge, and then they'd put it in an envelope. And it was extraordinary how the word changes.
Chinese, what we used to call Chinese whispers.
Exactly. It was so like Chinese whispers. And I think quite a lot of male-female relationships fell apart as a result.
By words that went wrong. That happened
words that went
of course, in text messaging. And I gather at one point the radio operator was, he liked too many drinks, didn't he?
He did.
And so he wasn't always very reliable in sending those messages.
No, dear chap, and he was the most lovely, lovely man. And but yeah, sadly, he did break the radio, and it was lovely. You'd see him sitting at the dining table with his pipe and a pint of something strong.
Yeah.
And little rocker arms and springs and all sorts of little things, valves and I don't know what, lying on the table. And you would say, how are you getting on? Oh, it'll be fine. Another week, I'm sure we'll have it. And another week would go by, and we'd go by week after week. But he would eventually get it fixed, but then go and break it again. And then we'd be off the air for a bit longer. But good man that he was. We had a long chat, and we formed a chain gang and moved all his liquor from his radio shack, as we called it, the room, up to a loft and hid it. And he gave up, and he was marvelous. He was great.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, very strong-minded.
Well, and again, we'll talk a bit later about being the leader of a team like that, but that's where clearly you were showing that sign of being able to grasp a situation and make the best of it. Show us a bit more from that book, because maybe it would just be interesting to know if there are any pages in there that show you what it's meant to be like and what it was really like in your view.
There's a lovely one. There's a lovely little picture. I mean, this is really old time. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, I can see it really well.
That. So that was my sort of ideal of, and this is a base in the 40s and early 50s, a Basque base, and again hadn't changed very much from the heroic era. All living cheek by jowl in a fairly small huts and so on. So the huts got bigger by the time I got there and that thing, but a lot of the ways were very much the same. Yeah.
Well, was everybody British, or were there any Americans?
Then, yes, they were, and of course these days we're very international, but just so many things were so different then. It was, people didn't travel the same anyway from country to country. Package holidays hadn't picked up either. It was
very early.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can we have a look at some of the pictures you've sent us from your album? I have no idea whether these are going to be in the right order, as it were, but I'm sure you remember each moment. And that's you, dog sledding.
Yes, it is. That's with called the Players Dog Team. The teams all had names, and I ran the players. I always like to say ran with, because these dogs, we call them, sort of generic term, we call them huskies.
Yes.
Which huskies are actually, you see them as pets here in UK and elsewhere. They might well be related to a timber wolf and so on, whereas these dogs are the Greenland dog, and they're related to the Ellesmere Island and Greenland wolf. They're very much bigger. We had Kiwi, who weighed 52 kilo.
Wow.
Giles, who's the lead dog there, you can see front right there. Yes. My lead dog, he weighed about, I think, about 46 kilo. Then now he's very much lighter. I could ride on his back.
Good.
They're a very big dog. And at best, Konrad Lorenz wrote a lovely book called Of Man Meets Dog. And in that he describes the Greenland dogs. And he said all dogs behave like children or colleagues. Sorry, like children or friends. Whereas at best with a Greenland dog, they're a colleague. And that's very true. They don't entirely need you. And if they get loose, they're quite likely to run away. And they've got their own pecking order within their pack.
Yeah.
So you're really joining this group that are nigh on wolf and have the privilege of riding along with them. It's marvellous.
I'll bet it's a wonderful feeling. Well,
and then to Giles, this is summer sledging actually. I'm just out on a little jolly ride in the summer. You can see I'm not wearing a huge amount of.
Right.
I'm wearing an Irish tweed hat. And if I wanted Giles to turn left, I would shout, "Rrrr, rrrr." And if I wanted him to turn right, I'd shout, "Oak, oak, oak," and just two words that were very different and couldn't be confused, hopefully.
That's a lovely picture as well, but it is extraordinary seeing you in that background with just shirt sleeves. Quite extraordinary. Let's move on and see what other. Oh yes, here. What else is there?
Yeah, this is up in the Arctic after returning from a 2.5-year stint in the Antarctic. I was only home for 4 days and was invited to go and skipper a boat for the Cambridge Arctic Shelf Programme up in the Arctic, joining an extraordinary man, a real polar hero called Brian Harland, who first went to the Arctic in 1938. One of the toughest men I've ever met. He was a geologist at Cambridge University. And we became firm friends, and I eventually took over from Brian running his expeditions up north. So I did 6 seasons. But to begin with, I skippered a boat
Is that
here.
Saltarella?
She's called Saltarella. She was lovely, double-ended wooden 28-foot boat. We could spend anything up to a month and a half away from base at a time without calling back for a bit more food and so on. So there I am on Saltarella. Very exciting times. There wasn't any radio contact and no GPS then, so it was all dead reckoning navigation. And we got stuck in ice for up to a week at a time and very heavy seas, and deployed geological field camps all around Svalbard. So got to know Svalbard intimately. But some wonderful people worked with there. They were magnificent. It was probably more dangerous and more uncomfortable than some of the other things. Yeah.
Isn't it true that nearly every single year since those early days you have spent either in the Arctic or the Antarctic? You've always been every year.
Yes, or both, because some years I would get home from an Arctic season in September and then go down to the Antarctic in October and November, and then get home in April and go up to the Arctic again in June. So it was a bit like a yo-yo. really.
Yes. Well, yeah, crossing the whole.
So don't ask me about anything to the east or west. I get totally lost.
No, you know your poles pretty well. But I mean, clearly, what you'd always wanted to do since you were 6 or 7 turned out to be what you loved doing. And but why? What is it about it? Do you know? Can you put your finger on why you love that world so much?
Well, I think, as I say, at 6 years old, it was a deep-seated fascination with isolation and, you know, could you do it? And what would it be like? Am I up to it? And that sort of thing. And this, you know, what I'd heard about this extraordinary, wild and frozen places. And then later that just grows into an absolute fascination and love for this ever-changing parts of the planet that at the snap of the fingers can do the nasty on you. But,
well, yes,
but for most of the time are actually one of the nicest and actually in many ways safest parts of the planet to travel on. You know, it's if you're out traveling with a tent and a sled, if you get lost, you stop, unlike a boat where you drift away and that sort of thing. And if your tent blows away, you can actually dig down into the snow and get yourself protection there. You're digging into fresh water, what's more, as long as you've got, and I meant to bring one with me, it's through in the other room, a little Primus stove,
yes.
which Scott Shackleton Nansen used all those years ago and we still use today, a little brass paraffin stove. As long as that works, you can convert that snow to fresh water.
Yes, very
and hydrate yourself.
Yeah.
And but the sort of Russian roulette, of course, is always sea ice is dangerous, and falling into crevasses is the sort of nasty Russian roulette.
Yes.
And then, of course, becoming ill or being injured because you're and being isolated, you know, and that's the problem. But many of the other things aren't as bad as they're sometimes made out to be. I mean, you know, things do go wrong, but it's actually
losing fingers.
Yes, yeah. But they're, I always think of them, you know, people lying on sunbeds in the Costa del Sol or wherever, and in the evening they're drinking a glass of martini or whatever it might be, and suddenly notice that they're all red raw and sunburnt. And it's rather like that with frostbite, really. You suddenly realise that it's rather nice, actually. The cold is gone. You're feeling a bit numb, so the cold is gone. Dangerous. And in the evening, you're left with bruises, and you suddenly notice, oh goodness, yeah, I did get frostbitten. So it's not nice, no. But it's just the other extreme from sunburn, really. But it's still.
It's about understanding your environment, isn't it? And knowing the skills that can pull you through.
It is, yeah, and it really is a sort of almost. Sorry.
At what point did you become a base commander? Because I know you've held that role for a very long time.
Yes, it's certainly. I can't think. Well, 1987 when I became a base commander, and that was first of all in the Arctic, and then down in the Antarctic. And now in the Arctic again, and so yeah, the sort of dipped up and down in this role, but so that in many ways the sort of early days of boat skippering and being a polar guide, taking people out on, you know, perhaps 3 to 4 month sledge journeys, that sort of thing, and the dog travel and all those things, that was sort of like an apprenticeship, really. And what's quite nice in this base commander or station leader, they now call it in the Antarctic Survey, it was recently changed, is you're sort of using those skills just really to try and help and assist all these magnificent scientists to do what they want to do. And I have sort of 3 little rules to myself. One, that they should be safe.
Yes.
And the other, they should be productive, trying to get the work done, and the other, that hopefully they're happy as well, and that's so important. They're a long way from home.
Yes.
And they, you know, and the dynamics of the base, they don't always get on and all that sort of thing. So it's an interesting job.
I mean, you too, you're talking about making sure they're happy, and then occasionally you drop in the phrase, you know, that then you went home. How do you meet a wife? How do you have a family when you're doing what you do, being away for so long and being isolated for so long? How did any of that happen to you?
Well, usually it was picked up a letter in Montevideo, which said, "I have met Justin," or or, you know, usually decided not to continue with a relationship when you knew I was going to be heading south or north for a long time again. So tended just to sort of give that up, or, you know, being realistic. But the big day happened, and I met my lovely, lovely wife, who is a geologist in the Arctic. And there she is, Katie, or Catherine.
Yes.
And we have two lovely children, Charlotte and Joe. And
who are a bit bigger than that now.
Yes, yeah, they're Charlotte's, I think, 25 now, 26 rather, and Joe 28. And Joe joined me in the Arctic during his gap year, working for the Norwegians up there. But we had some lovely time together. There we are, clutching bits of growler ice.
Oh, look!
There we are all together we holiday every year if we can in the west of Ireland, and other places, of course. But that's our sort of favourite get-together place. And but we're all in it together. Joe and Charlotte went to the Arctic at the age of 1 through to the age of 7 or so. So we're all rather sort of steeped in it. And Joe spent 2 summers in the Antarctic as well as, you know. So we're all into it.
And you honeymooned in the Arctic, I think.
We did. We did. I thought I was returning to the Antarctic when I, proposed. It wasn't very romantic. I proposed to Katie from the cable and wireless telephone in Port Stanley on New Year's Eve. Wasn't very romantic. So I didn't get home for about another 4 or 5 months. But I came home from the Arctic 2 weeks before the wedding day, and we got wed, and lovely, lovely wedding. And then we both headed up to the Arctic, and Katie worked for the Norwegians. So we had an Arctic honeymoon, arrived in a helicopter with just married sort of things written on it.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, yes, it was lovely.
I mean, your whole family clearly understand what you're about and share a love of it by the sound of it. Obviously, everybody watching right now wants to ask you about the wildlife that you see when you're there. And we've got some lovely video, which I'm sure you can help. Well, this is something you're going to be telling Viking cruisers about, isn't it? Is what they might be able to see when they're on board. It is a spectacular landscape, of course it is. And I know so many people will find it instructional just to, I don't know, it's a world that most of us never see. Do you think we will, if we're on cruises aboard the Atlantis and the Octantis and the Polaris, will we see this sort of wildlife?
Oh yes, in abundance. Certainly Antarctic, is just steeped in it. You'll see, all these images you see. You might not see a humpback whale breach like that, but who knows? That might well be a blue whale down there. Do you know the tongue of a blue whale weighs about the same as an elephant? It's just so many, everything, wherever you look, you're just going to be your jaw dropping. It's wonderful. And same in the Arctic, just so rich in things to see. Of course, everyone wants to see the polar bear.
Yes.
And I would say that's a little bit like, seeing red foxes here in the UK. There's lots about, and occasionally you see them. And it's same with bears. So, but that's what makes it such a really precious and fantastic moment when you do see this extraordinary creature, lolloping along or swimming along or whatever it might be doing. And there you see the leopard seals, the penguin, killer whales. Oh yes, they're just so rich. The lovely, lovely thing, particularly in the Antarctic, and it's very humbling, I always think, is that they don't fear us. And it's just such a lovely thing to be at close quarters with these extraordinary creatures who don't see you as a threat. And it's, as I say, humbling. It's just so lovely.
And as I was saying at the very beginning, the Antarctic and the Arctic, of course, are going to be there. But as well as being curious visitors, we need to be careful, don't we?
We do, and I think, you know, keeping distance from the creatures, that's important. Of course, not going to their territory, and being clean and tidy, that we don't leave things. But we're good at doing that, you know.
We know enough now, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yes, it's great. Things have never been better.
Have you ever had any, you know, sort of close-up encounters with wildlife like that?
Oh yes, lots and lots. Yeah.
And scary.
Oh, there's a nice walrus. I took that picture. It's rather nice, just scratching his nose.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I've seen, I don't know how many polar bears, just lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of them, and it's always a joy. And only once did one get a bit aggressive with me, and it was the classic mum with a tiny little bear, lovely, walking along on the sea ice, and I thought I was I was a long way from her, you know, at least sort of half a kilometre, something like that, or more, and thought, you know, she's fine, she's not going to bother about me. And suddenly she must have caught the sniff of me, caught the smell, and she turned. And they take a little while to get going. They're sort of like the back legs are trying to overtake the front, sort of going sideways for a bit, and then they straighten up and they go like an arrow, absolutely low and like an arrow. And I had a gun, and of course I would not want to use it. So I ran to my skidoo, which sounds great, but skidoos then weren't terribly reliable. And it was in the springtime, it was quite cold. And it was the old hand pull skidoos, and this one actually was very temperamental.
But you have to yank it to get it
going. You have
to
keep yanking, and yank a lot, and play around with chokes and that sort of thing, trying to get the blasted thing to, yeah, there we are, a skidoo there, trying to get this thing to jump into life. So I wasn't sure of it. So I was pulling away on this thing, and she came, and she must have been, you know, I could see into her eyes. She was certainly, what, I don't know, probably about 30 meters away, which seemed very close.
Yes.
And I got the engine going, but actually what she kept coming, but to this day I don't quite understand it. The little bear ran away. She was still on the sea ice, and she started running away, the noise of the engine, and the mother bear, just great flurry of snow, just turned like a car skidding, and turned and ran after the cub. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have been a problem. I'd got the engine going, but it was close. You know, she was close on my heels. All of a sudden.
A little. Gosh. But again, occasionally, I suppose these things happen to just bring you up to.
Exactly. Good reminder. We're in their home. We have to be careful.
Yes. We've got some more wonderful video, mostly of, I think, the Arctic in this one, of the amazing sights that can be seen. The sky always looks so blue. The sea always looks so blue. Is it really like that there?
No, in the summertime, it must be said, of course, summer is warmest, and July typically the warmest month. Things have changed. This is, you know, my observation, not basing this on science, but, you know, things have changed in recent years. It used to be cold and stay good and cold right up through into early June, and then go cold again at the end of August, whereas now certainly end of May and then through into October, or even to about, you know, this time of year, you know, getting well on into October, where it can be, put it this way, not as cold as it should be. So when it's warm, you do get more overcast skies, but that can also be very beautiful. I love it actually when you've got a lovely grey overcast sky, because the ice looks just even bluer and more beautiful very often. I mean, it can look really fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's always lovely to have a sunny day, but in many ways, those sort of proper polar days are, you know, typical polar days where it's a bit grey and windy, can be very, very pretty.
It's interesting. We're seeing so many walruses there. I've just heard that the British Antarctic Survey are asking people to count walruses. So, I mean, anyone watching right now, you can just go to the British Antarctic Survey to their website, and apparently they've uploaded satellite images, and they ask you to, or they deliver an image to you, and you have got to be trained. You have to go through a little training video of how to count the number of walruses. This is the only way apparently they can figure out how many walruses there are. Isn't that astonishing? It's a way of joining in.
Isn't it great? It's the World Wildlife Fund and the British Antarctic Survey, and Peter Fretwell, who I'm working with at this moment on his walrus visits, because they're going to go and do some sort of ground truth visits.
Yeah.
And he and members of the Norwegian Polar Institute are going to work at sites that we're sort of working at, whether it's possible up in the Arctic. But they're the fun ones. They're nice when you're dealing with the animals. They're great.
Because you were saying your job, as you see it, is mainly to enable the scientists and geologists to do whatever scientific research they are doing. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to find out?
All sorts of things. They're extraordinary. To get that far, to be sent out to a polar region and to do what they do, they are good. They're magnificent, and they are working on all sorts of things that are a sort of chink in the wall that builds up our understanding of planet Earth and beyond, whether it be atmospheric science, life sciences, the animals and birds and so on, ice, glaciology, geology, terrestrial ecology, and so on and so on. And they're all putting their chinks in. And some of it, of course, is linked to global warming, which is, we all know. It used to be a footnote at the bottom of a newspaper page not many years ago, and now it's a sort of household word. And isn't it great? Isn't it great?
It is great.
So of course there are things which are linked to farming policy and that sort of thing, and to fishing.
Yes.
There are things which are linked to safeguarding satellites, space weather and that sort of thing. So it's just extraordinary what they come up with. What I see them with all these extraordinary bits of equipment that they've got and what they're going to try and do, and then I go along to some of these conferences to meet them and talk about future things, but sit in and listen to them presenting results, and it's just extraordinary what they're finding.
And very, very important. Well, that's why it's important you're doing the job you do.
It's just marvelous.
I thought everybody at home would like to have a look at the video that the IAATO has produced about what, and probably this is something that everybody will have to watch when they're aboard Viking exploration ships, which is the expedition ships, which is this sort of how to behave in the Arctic and Antarctic, how to behave in a way that totally respects the environment. Have a look at this, because I think this is absolutely beautifully made. It's a video from IAATO, which you can tell us what it stands for in a minute.
Antarctica is one of the most beautiful, unique and perfectly preserved regions on the planet. Its frozen landscapes are home to many amazing species, each uniquely adapted to its extraordinary climate. Largely untouched and undisturbed, special guidelines exist to ensure it continues to be a constant source of wonder and inspiration. Following all leader advice allows you to have the safest and best experience possible while keeping Antarctica pristine. The continent has some of the most severe winds on the planet, so when ashore, please secure your belongings to avoid anything being blown away. Inspecting and cleaning your clothing and equipment, as well as not bringing food ashore, can help avoid the introduction of non-native species to the areas you are exploring. It is also important that you avoid walking on any vegetation or disturbing any freshwater lakes or streams, as it can take many decades for them to recover from damage or pollution. Some areas in Antarctica have been given extra protection under the Antarctic Treaty for environmental, scientific or historic reasons. Your leaders will let you know the location of these sites and any restrictions regarding visitation. Removing anything during your visit to Antarctica is strictly prohibited. This includes rocks, fossils or plants, and any wildlife items such as feathers, bones and eggs. We politely ask you to leave them undisturbed. And of course, while we appreciate beauty of all kinds, we also ask that you do not build, paint or engrave things on the surfaces found on your journey. All species found in your travels are in their natural environment. We ask that you do not feed, touch or bother them in any way. Be aware of your surroundings. Penguin highways are subtle and can be easily missed underfoot. You will see many types of Antarctica's birds and mammals on your trip. When on shore, be aware of how animals react to you when walking around. Keeping at least 5 meters from wildlife will ensure the best experience for both parties. Some species are more vulnerable to disturbance and require greater distance. Your leader or guide will provide instruction when necessary. If you do end up accidentally getting too close, some adult animals may defend themselves or their nests. If you sense an attack, gently put your hand in the air and increase your distance. Additionally, some adult seals may defend themselves. Never walk between a mother seal and her pup. The Antarctic environment is inhospitable, unpredictable, and potentially very dangerous, with hidden crevasses and frequent blizzards. Along your journey, you may discover various huts. However, please only enter if invited or during an emergency. Dressing appropriately, taking extra precaution at all times, and always listening to your guide will ensure you have a safe and most rewarding experience. Remember to stop often and reflect on the beauty around you. Respecting and appreciating your surroundings is the easiest way to ensure this experience lasts for all those who come after you. On behalf of Antarctica and IALTO, we thank you for taking the time to watch the visitor guidelines and hope you enjoy your journey.
Well, I don't know about you, Nick, but I think that's a beautifully made video, and it certainly does remind us to be respectful of this incredibly new world that some of us will be able to visit.
It certainly does, and you know, well done Viking Cruises as well. I mean, it is so important. I often think of polar regions rather like the sort of park in the middle of a big city. You know, it's the sort of untouched part of the city, and our head be it if we go and mess it up.
Yes,
you know, we've
absolutely
got to look after it. And here we have these 2 huge parks, pristine, cleanest bits of the planet, and on our heads be it if we mess up. It's great attention being given to this.
Yeah, well, you're going to be joining Viking when people are able to go into those amazing regions. You've had many awards and decorations for your work, including 2 polar medals and an MBE. I know that you were a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and of the UK Arctic Consultative Forum. But most magnificent of all, you've had a mountain in Antarctica named after you. How did that happen?
Well, big surprise, and that was last December, and the government of the British Antarctic Territory, which is a part of the UK government, they wanted to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the first sighting of Antarctica, which of course was Bellinghausen and Bransfield. It sort of happened within days of each other in 1820, so there's always a little bit of vying as to who actually see the continent first. But anyway, so they were celebrating the 200th anniversary and decided just to name some features after various folk who'd been involved for a fair old while, and I'm just so grateful to them that they included me on the list and named a mountain. It was lovely of them.
It's absolutely brilliant to have a mountain named after you, especially in a part of the world that you revere so much.
I must say, I mean, now there's a sort of glow comes up all over me, just the thought of the mountain. It was so lovely of them. It's, you know, to the end of my days, I'll just be very grateful. It's just so lovely.
You must be looking forward to doing it in style. next time I think you'll be aboard one of the Viking expedition ships, and a very different world from the one you described at the beginning. You won't be pulling teeth there, and you won't be eating out of tins. I don't think it'll be an entirely different world. Shall we have a quick look at the? I mean, the ships aren't ready for us to walk around yet, but this is one of the latest videos, and this shows a part of the ship that just looks so beautiful, and they're calling it the Orla and Finsa Terrace. Have a look at this. Oh, Nick, that's where you'll be, delivering one of your lectures and telling everybody about the amazing sights they are seeing and will see the next day. I've got some lovely questions for you, if you wouldn't mind. Brian from Milwaukee says, what are your hopes for the future? Do you see scientific research in these areas become increasingly more important as we fight climate change?
Oh, most definitely to stay ahead of the game, and they're doing great things, and you know, we're seeing results already. You know, you think, I mean, this is not directly climate change, or a scientist probably say I'm talking rubbish, but when we found the hole in the ozone hole, and you know, that would have fried us. I mean, I was working in the field in the Antarctic, taking a geologist out and sledging, and we were underneath the record hole in the ozone, and we really did get very burnt. It was really not nice.
So you've actually experienced
very much
the reality.
So. Yep. Oh yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because my next question is from Tess in New York. She says, me and my husband are hoping to join one of the Viking expeditions as soon as we can next year. Are we just indulging ourselves, or is it actually important for ordinary people like us to see the effects of global warming?
Yeah, I think the more people who can see it in the right and correct way, which Viking cruises are going to do. I mean, we just saw that video clip earlier. To do it in the right way, absolutely essential, because, you know, there are marvelous television programs, there are marvelous books, there's the web, of course, but for people to see it, you know, things really happen once people have seen it and get a real feel for what's happening. There's nothing like it. So every ambassador that returns from the Arctic and the Antarctic with that knowledge is going to do nothing but good.
That's interesting, because Len and Eva from London have also said, the old saying goes, what you visit, you inevitably change. Aren't you worried that polar exploring will hasten change to the region? We want to come, but we're worried we might be being selfish. That more or less.
Yeah, you know, you can understand their concerns, but I think it's, you know, we have this with science as well, you know, balancing the pollutant that we bring to do the science. And of course there is some, you can't escape it, but you know, you're not going to solve a problem by not grasping it. So that's what we do. And actually, to understand it, for everybody to understand it, you know, it's not just a platform for scientists. And I think, just as I said just now, for people to see it and to spread the word, it's really worth it. Well worth it. Well done. You know, when it comes to it, Viking cruises and other tour ships. There are so few. It's tiny little impact. Antarctica's twice the size of Australia.
Wow. Hadn't really thought of it like that.
Just about. I think Australia's 7 million square kilometres and the Antarctic's 13 million square kilometres. So, good as.
It brings us back to Shatner as well, in a way. William Shatner, we were talking about at the beginning. He went up into space and came down, but the first thing he said was that he appreciated this tiny sliver of atmosphere that protects us from what's out there. And he came back and he said it. And maybe the more people who see the Arctic and Antarctic and appreciate it and love it and spread that word, maybe word of mouth will be one of the strongest ways of influencing change and thought. Sally from Nevada says, you're used to the cold. Any tips for a total beginner traveling to that frozen region?
Wow. Well, I think, are we talking about clothing and so on? I think
we are, yeah.
Yeah, clothing. There's so much good material around these days, and it's always said this thing, layers is the great thing, some good underwear. Natural materials are often the best. It's really nice to be wearing cotton, wool, silk. All these things that, not only do they stay sort of fresher longer, but they also, just feel that much better, and they are warm. So, if you can go those products, it's quite good in this day and age to stay away from fleece jackets, which are sort of made out of minced up plastic bottles or whatever. Yeah. There's a lot of plastic and a lot of microplastic goes out through the washing machine into the ecosystem. We're finding that happening a lot in the Arctic.
And as you say, we're discovering more and more all the time, more and more ways to combat that.
Well, there's so much good stuff out there, but something just to cut the wind. You don't generally have to worry too much about the wet, but something to really stop the wind in its path is great. And a spare hat. Hats tend to blow away.
Is that right?
Take a spare hat. Always have a spare hat in your pocket.
That's a very good
because they have a habit of blowing away.
Ellen in Oslo says, for someone who has led such a distanced and almost solitary life, how on earth did you meet your wife? Well, we did ask you that, didn't we? You obviously get enough time at home. For instance, in the last year during COVID, I presume you've had to stay at home like everybody else.
Yeah, first time, yeah. So that was an experience, and but lovely as well. Of course, there's a bit like a swallow. There's that sort of feeling ought to be migrating, but it was lovely having some summertime with family and all the things. So yeah, lots of pleasure.
So when do you next go?
There was a plan actually to go up to Ny-Ålesund in Svalbard in December, but in the past few days we've actually decided probably won't. So going up beginning of February, and then we see the sun on March the 7th.
Oh, right.
So we'll go up before the sun comes up, but you can actually do quite a lot outdoors in that sort of lead up to the sun returning. If it's a clear sky, you can still sort of do a 9 to 5 outdoors before the sun comes up. And then the big day comes when the sun arrives, and it's just gorgeous. It's lovely, particularly for those souls who've been there all winter.
Yeah. Yes, you must be really impatient to get there.
Oh, it's lovely. Yeah, I can't wait.
Get your yearly injection of
exactly.
Energy. Yes, exactly. It's been wonderful and inspirational to meet you. Thank you so much. And of course, hopefully, one of the very soon you'll actually be aboard one of the Viking ships and sort of being able to transmit your enthusiasm for the area to others as well. It's been great to meet you, Nick. Thank you so much, and love to your whole family.
Well, thank you, Anne. I can't thank you enough, and to all, and the crew, and everyone. And thanks to Viking Cruises. But thanks so much.
Inspirational. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Nick Cox, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, let me just tell you, wasn't that wonderful? Let me just tell you that next week we are looking at great libraries of the world and their amazing book collections. And I'm going to be meeting a woman who compiled an amazing book, which is just there behind me. I'll reach over and get it in a minute. It's called Treasures from the Map Room. And it's an absolutely stunning look at some of the great historic and picturesque maps in the collection at Oxford's Bodleian Library. She's absolutely amazing the way she talks, the stories behind these incredible maps. There she is. And she's called Debbie Hall, and she's put together this fabulous book, which I discovered actually on a Viking cruise. You know how brilliant the libraries are on board a Viking cruise ship. Well, that's where I discovered that book, and I thought she would make a wonderful interviewee for you here on Viking Television. So she is next week. But until I see you next week, then have a wonderful week. Keep safe and well. Bye-bye.